The gunshot that shattered Katherine Brennan's kitchen window on that sweltering July morning in 1878 wasn't aimed at her, but the warning was clear enough. She stood at her stove, cast iron skillet in hand, staring at the hole in the glass while her neighbors shouted apologies from the street. Another drunken argument, another careless discharge of a weapon, another reminder that Stillwater, Oklahoma was still more frontier than town. Katherine set down the skillet with deliberate calm, swept up the glass, and went right back to frying her eggs. She had bought this house with money she earned herself, running the only seamstress shop between here and Guthrie, and no stray bullet was going to chase her out of her own kitchen. At 24 years old, Katherine had buried one husband already. Thomas Brennan had been a good man, kind and hardworking, but the fever that swept through 3 years back hadn't cared about his goodness. It took him in 4 days, left Katherine a widow at 21 with a mortgage, a failing dress shop, and a choice. She could have returned to her father's farm in Missouri, could have accepted the charity of relatives who clucked their tongues and said, "Poor dear." Instead, she had rolled up her sleeves, taught herself bookkeeping, expanded her services to include tailoring for men, and turned that failing shop into the most profitable business on Main Street. The town hadn't quite known what to make of her. Women were supposed to remarry quickly, to find another man to take care of them. Katherine had other ideas. She wore simple dark dresses that she sewed herself, kept her chestnut hair pinned back in a practical bun, and conducted her business with the same straightforward efficiency she applied to everything else. She extended credit to families who needed it, charged fair prices, and kept her accounts balanced to the penny. She attended church on Sundays, was polite to everyone, and made it quietly clear that she wasn't looking for another husband. That last part caused the most trouble. In 3 years, she had turned down 6 proposals, including one from the bank manager, one from a successful rancher, and one from the new school teacher. She had been gentle about it at first, thanking them kindly and explaining that she was content as she was. But as the rejections piled up, the explanations people invented grew more creative. She was unnatural. She was too proud. She was damaged by grief. She was betraying her late husband's memory by being too independent, or alternatively, by not moving on. The logic didn't have to make sense. It just had to give people something to say. The worst had been Walter Sutton. He owned the feed store and had decided 6 months ago that Katherine would make him a suitable wife. When she declined, he started a quiet campaign of interference. He suggested to other merchants that extending credit to a woman's business was risky. He made jokes about spinsters and old maids whenever Katherine was within earshot. He had even gone to Reverend Morris to express concern about a woman living alone, without proper protection or guidance. Katherine dealt with it the way she dealt with everything, by working harder and saying less. Her stitches were the straightest, her measurements the most accurate, her turnaround times the fastest. She couldn't control what people said, but she could control the quality of her work. Let them talk. She had a business to run. The morning of the stray bullet, she finished her breakfast, changed into a fresh dress of deep blue cotton, and walked the 4 blocks to her shop. July in Oklahoma meant heat that rose off the red dirt roads in visible waves, meant dust that coated everything, meant afternoons when the smartest thing to do was find shade and stay still. Katherine had learned to do her errands early, to keep her shop's curtains drawn against the worst of the sun, to save complex sewing for the cooler evenings. She was unlocking her shop door when she heard the commotion down the street. A group of men on horseback were riding in, trail-worn and tired-looking. Cowboys bringing a herd through, most likely, stopping to resupply before moving on. Stillwater saw plenty of those. The town had good water, hence the name, and sat at a convenient point along several cattle routes. Cowboys meant business, but they also meant noise, drinking, and the occasional brawl. Katherine made a mental note to finish her shopping before the saloon started filling up, then went inside. The shop was her sanctuary. Bolts of fabric lined the walls in organized rows, sorted by color and material. Her sewing machine, a treasured singer that she had saved for months to buy, sat in the place of honor near the front window where the light was best. A dress form stood in the corner, currently wearing a half-finished gown in rose silk, a commission from the mayor's wife. The space smelled like cotton and starch, and the lavender sachets she tucked into drawers to keep the moths away. She had 3 orders to finish this week: the rose gown, 2 shirts for a rancher named Peters, and a suit for a young man about to leave for college back east. Katherine settled at her machine and lost herself in the familiar rhythm of the work. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, feeding fabric under the needle in smooth, straight lines. This was where she felt most herself, most certain. Thread and cloth didn't care if she was a woman alone. A well-made seam was a well-made seam, regardless of who sewed it. She worked through the morning, stopping only to help customers. Mrs. Chen came in for buttons. Young Billy Foster needed his church pants hemmed. Martha Hayes brought her daughter to be measured for a new Sunday dress, and Katherine chatted pleasantly while she worked, taking down numbers in her neat handwriting. Normal business, normal people, a normal day. It was just past noon when Walter Sutton appeared in her doorway. Katherine saw him through the window before he entered, and her stomach tightened. She kept her expression neutral and her hands busy, finishing the seam she was working on before looking up. "Mr. Sutton," she said politely, "what can I do for you?" Walter was a thick-set man in his 40s, with a round face and small eyes that never seemed to settle on one thing for long. He held his hat in his hands, turning it in circles, and his expression was aggrieved. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, his tone heavy with false concern. "I feel it's my duty to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy." Katherine set down her work and folded her hands in her lap. "Go on. It's come to my attention that you've been conducting business with some of the ranchers outside town, taking commissions, doing custom work." He paused meaningfully, meeting with men in private. Katherine felt heat rise in her face, but her voice stayed level. "I'm a seamstress, Mr. Sutton. Meeting with clients is part of my business. I take measurements and discuss designs. There's nothing improper about it." "Perhaps not in your mind," Walter said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "But people talk, Mrs. Brennan. A young woman alone, inviting men into her shop, or, worse, traveling out to their ranches. It gives the wrong impression. The impression that I'm a professional doing my job." "The impression," Walter said sharply, "that you have no regard for your reputation. A decent woman would see the problem here. A decent woman would accept that she needs a husband's protection and guidance." There it was, finally out in the open. Katherine stood slowly, drawing herself up to her full height. She wasn't a tall woman, but she had learned to use what she had. She met Walter's eyes directly. "I have repeatedly made clear that I have no interest in marriage at this time, Mr. Sutton. Not to you, not to anyone. That is my choice to make, and I'll thank you to respect it." "Your choice," Walter repeated, his face reddening. "Your choice has consequences, Mrs. Brennan. Men won't want to do business with a woman who puts on airs, who thinks she's too good for the natural order of things. You'll find it hard to keep this shop running when people start taking their custom elsewhere." "Is that a threat, Mr. Sutton?" "It's a fact." He jammed his hat back on his head. "You're not as independent as you think you are. This town made you, and it can break you just as easy. You do well to remember that." He stalked out, leaving the shop door swinging open behind him. Katherine stood very still, her hands clenched at her sides, waiting for the anger and fear to subside into something manageable. She had known this was coming. Walter wasn't the type to accept rejection gracefully. But hearing the threat said out loud was different from anticipating it. She closed the door carefully, turned the lock, and allowed herself 5 minutes to sit down and shake. Then she got back to work. The rose gown wasn't going to finish itself. The afternoon passed slowly. Katherine kept expecting more trouble, more confrontations, but nothing came. She completed the gown, pressed it carefully, and wrapped it in muslin. When the shadows started growing long, she closed up shop and walked home through the dusty streets, hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation. Her house was small but sturdy. A 2-room frame building with a front porch and a yard she had optimistically planted with vegetables. The garden was struggling in the heat, but the tomatoes were coming in and the beans looked promising. Katherine changed out of her work dress, made herself a simple supper of bread and cheese and sliced tomatoes, and tried to read by lamplight. The words swam on the page. She kept thinking about Walter's face, about the pleasure he had taken in threatening her. She finally gave up on reading and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, she delivered the rose gown to the mayor's wife, who exclaimed over the workmanship and paid promptly. Katherine tucked the money into her reticule and walked back toward her shop, feeling marginally better. Whatever Walter thought, she still had customers. She still had work. She would be fine. She was passing the stable when she heard the voice. "Madam." "Excuse me, madam." Katherine turned. A man was standing in the stable doorway, tall and rangy, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore dusty range clothes, denim pants and a worn shirt, and a hat pushed back on his head. His face was sun-browned and tired-looking, but his eyes were kind. "Yes," Katherine said cautiously. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice carrying a slow western drawl, "but I'm told you're the seamstress in town and I'm in need of some work done. My trail boss mentioned you specifically." Katherine relaxed slightly. "That's right, I'm Mrs. Brennan. What do you need?" The man gestured ruefully at his shirt. "Pretty much everything I own is falling apart, madam. 6 months on the trail will do that. I need shirts, a new pair of pants if you do that kind of work, and my good jacket has a tear in the shoulder that needs mending. I know it's a lot, but we'll be in town for a week or so and I can pay fair." It was a lot of work, but it was also a substantial commission. Katherine found herself nodding. "I can do all of that. Come by my shop this afternoon and I'll take your measurements and we can discuss specifics." "It's the blue building on Main Street, right past the general store." "Much obliged, madam." The man tipped his hat. "Name's Reid Caldwell, by the way. I'll see you this afternoon." Katherine nodded and continued on her way, feeling slightly better. New customers, new work. Walter could threaten all he liked, but as long as she kept producing quality work, she would have business. Reid Caldwell appeared at her shop just after 2 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, though they were still trail-worn. Up close, Katherine could see that he was probably close to her own age, maybe a year or two older, with gray eyes and a quiet, thoughtful manner. He removed his hat when he entered and looked around the shop with genuine interest. "This is a fine setup you have here," he said. "Very organized." "Thank you," Katherine said, pulling out her measuring tape and notebook. "Let's start with measurements. If you could take off your jacket." They fell into the professional routine. Katherine worked quickly and efficiently, noting down numbers, asking about preferences in collar styles and cuff lengths. Reid was an easy client, clear about what he needed but not fussy. He stood still when required, answered questions directly, and didn't make uncomfortable jokes or inappropriate comments. It was refreshing. "You said you're with a trail crew?" Katherine asked as she measured his sleeve length. "Yes, madam. We brought a herd up from Texas, selling it to buyers in Kansas. This is our halfway stop, more or less. Chance to rest the cattle, rest ourselves, and resupply. 6 months on the trail sounds difficult." "It can be," Reid admitted, "but it's honest work and the pay's decent. I've been doing it for about 6 years now, since I was 19. Seen a lot of country." "Do you have family back in Texas?" "No, madam. Lost my parents when I was young, grew up working ranches. The trail became home in a way." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "What about you? Are you from Stillwater originally?" Katherine hesitated, then decided honesty was easier. "Missouri originally. I came here with my husband 7 years ago. He passed away 3 years back and I stayed on." "I'm sorry for your loss," Reid said quietly. "That must have been hard." "It was." Katherine finished the sleeve measurement and moved on. "But life continues. I have my business, my home, I manage." "Seems like you do more than manage," Reid observed. "This shop, the work you're doing, it's impressive." Katherine glanced up at him, checking for sarcasm or mockery, but his expression was sincere. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. They finished the measurements and Katherine calculated the cost. Reid paid half upfront without haggling, promised to return in 3 days for a first fitting, and left. Katherine watched him go, feeling oddly unsettled. It had been a long time since anyone had called her work impressive without adding a qualifier. Impressive for a woman. Impressive considering her circumstances. Just impressive, full stop. She shook her head and got back to work. She had shirts to make. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Katherine threw herself into Reid's commission, working late into the evenings. The shirts came together beautifully, crisp white cotton with mother-of-pearl buttons, the stitching small and even. She took pride in the work, in the way the fabric fell just right, in the perfectly symmetrical collars. Reid came for his fitting exactly when promised, and Katherine made a few minor adjustments. He tried on one of the shirts and stood in front of her mirror, looking almost surprised. "This is fine work, madam," he said. "Best shirt I've ever owned, I think." "It's not finished yet," Katherine said, marking a spot on the shoulder seam. "But it should be ready tomorrow along with the pants. The jacket will take another day." "No rush," Reid assured her. "We've got time." He was lingering, Katherine realized. Not in an uncomfortable way, but as if he was reluctant to leave. She finished marking the adjustments and stepped back. "Was there something else you needed, Mr. Caldwell?" "Reid, please," he said. "And no, nothing else. I wanted to ask, is there a good place to eat in town?" "Somewhere that's not the saloon. Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house that serves meals to non-residents," Katherine said. "The food is excellent. 2 blocks north, the white house with green shutters." "Much obliged." Reid hesitated, then added, "I don't suppose you'd be willing to join me?" "As a thank you for the fine work." Katherine's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't have dinner with customers, didn't blur the line between professional and personal. But something made her pause. Reid's expression was hopeful but not presumptuous. He was giving her an easy out if she wanted it, and she was surprised to find that she didn't want it. "That would be nice," she heard herself say. "I could meet you there at 6 if that suits you." Reid's whole face brightened. "6 is perfect. I'll see you then, madam." After he left, Katherine stood in her shop and wondered what she had just done. She had turned down dinner invitations from pillars of the community, from successful businessmen, from men who could offer her security and status. And here, she was accepting an invitation from a cowboy passing through town, a man who owned little more than what he could carry, and who would be gone in a week. But when 6 o'clock came, she found herself walking toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house anyway, wearing a fresh dress and feeling oddly nervous. Reid was waiting on the porch, cleaned up and wearing one of his old shirts. He stood when he saw her, his face lighting up in a way that made something warm bloom in Katherine's chest. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Mrs. Patterson served pot roast with vegetables, and the conversation flowed naturally. Reid asked about her work, about how she had learned to sew, about the challenges of running a business. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, asked follow-up questions, and didn't interrupt. Katherine found herself talking more than she usually did, telling stories about difficult customers and technical challenges, even laughing at Reid's tales from the trail. "So there we were," Reid was saying, "in the middle of a thunderstorm, cattle spooked and running in every direction, and Jenkins decides this is the perfect time to inform us that he's terrified of lightning. Has been his whole life. Just forgot to mention it before. What did you do?" Katherine asked, smiling despite herself. "Told him to be more terrified of our trail boss if he didn't get back to work," Reid said with a grin. "He managed, but we didn't let him forget it for weeks." They lingered over coffee, the other diners gradually leaving until they were the last ones there. Mrs. Patterson finally came out to politely suggest that she needed to close up the dining room, and Katherine was startled to realize how much time had passed. Reid walked her home through the warm evening, maintaining a respectful distance. The streets were quiet, most people already settled in for the night. Katherine was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the careful way he matched his stride to hers. "Thank you for joining me," Reid said when they reached her porch. "I have to say this was the best evening I've had in a long time." "I enjoyed it too," Katherine admitted, "more than I expected to." Reid smiled at that. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment. I'll come by tomorrow for the shirts. They'll be ready." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. "Mrs. Brennan, Katherine, if I may, I hope you don't mind my saying, but I think what you've done here is remarkable, building a business on your own, supporting yourself. That takes real strength." Katherine felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Some people would say it makes me unnatural." "Some people are fools," Reid said simply. "Your strength makes you more beautiful." He said it so straightforwardly, without poetry or flourish, that it hit Katherine like a physical thing. She stood on her porch, speechless, as Reid tipped his hat again and walked away into the darkness. She went inside and sat down in her small parlor, those words echoing in her head. "Your strength makes you more beautiful. Not in spite of, not although, because of." Something shifted in her chest, some door she had locked tight 3 years ago cracking open just slightly. She sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the night sounds of Stillwater and feeling something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next morning, Katherine woke with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She dressed carefully, took extra time with her hair, then felt foolish and took it back down to pin it up in her usual practical style. She was being ridiculous. Reid was a customer, and more than that, he was leaving. In a few days, he would be back on the trail to Kansas, and she would be here in Stillwater, exactly where she had been before. But when he came to pick up his shirts, and his face lit up at the sight of her, she couldn't help smiling back. "These are perfect," he said, examining the shirts with obvious pleasure. "Better than I could have hoped for." "The pants still need another day," Katherine said. "And the jacket, I want to make sure the mend is invisible." "I trust your judgment," Reid said. Then, with a slightly nervous edge to his voice, "I was wondering if you might have dinner with me again tonight, unless you're tired of my company already." Katherine knew she should say no. She should maintain professional boundaries, should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like that." They fell into a pattern over the next few days. Reid would come by the shop in the afternoon to check on progress or pick up finished work. Sometimes he would help her carry bolts of fabric or hold patterns in place while she cut. He had steady hands and a patient temperament, and Katherine found his presence surprisingly comfortable. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, either at Mrs. Patterson's or at the small restaurant near the edge of town, and they would talk for hours. Reid told her about his childhood, about growing up on a ranch in southern Texas after his parents died. He had been raised by the ranch owner's wife, a stern but kind woman who had taught him to read and write and to value hard work. He talked about the freedom of the trail, the satisfaction of bringing a herd through safely, the camaraderie of the crew. Katherine found herself sharing things she rarely spoke about. Her marriage to Thomas, which had been warm but not passionate. Her grief after his death, and the unexpected relief mixed with the sadness because she was finally free to make her own choices. Her determination to prove that she could survive on her own, and the cost of that determination in terms of loneliness and judgment. "Don't you ever want to leave?" Reid asked one evening. They were sitting on her front porch, watching the sun set in streaks of gold and crimson. "Just pack up and go somewhere where nobody knows you, where you could start fresh." "Sometimes," Katherine admitted. "But then I think about what I've built here. This shop, my reputation, my home. If I left, I'd be starting from nothing again. And I'd be letting Walter Sutton win." Reid's expression darkened. "That's the man who's been causing you trouble." Katherine had mentioned Walter in passing, though she had downplayed the situation. "He's just bitter about being refused. It will blow over." "I'm not so sure about that," Reid said slowly. "I've heard talk in town, Katherine. There are men saying things about you, spreading rumors. It's not right." Katherine felt a chill despite the warm evening. "What kind of things?" "Nothing worth repeating," Reid said firmly. "Just know that it's happening. And if there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, you only have to ask." "You'll be leaving soon," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice light. "Back to your trail and your crew." "About that." Reid shifted to face her. "I've been thinking. This might be my last drive. I'm 25 years old, Katherine, and I have nothing to show for 6 years of work except a horse, some clothes, and money in the bank that I never spend because I'm always on the trail. I've been wondering if it might be time to settle down somewhere, find a place to put down roots." Katherine's heart was beating too fast. "Where would you go?" "That depends," Reid said quietly. "I've gotten attached to Stillwater these past few days, or rather to someone in Stillwater." The words hung in the air between them. Katherine knew she should be sensible, should remind him that they had known each other less than a week, should protect herself from this. Instead, she said, "I've gotten attached too, more than I thought possible." Reid reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "I leave in 2 days," he said. "I have to finish this drive, have to see it through, but I could come back. I could come back and stay if you wanted me to." "Reid," Katherine's voice shook. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of me. I've worked too hard for my independence to give it up now." "I know that," Reid said. "I wouldn't want you to. I'm not proposing to rescue you, Katherine. I'm saying that I admire what you've built and I'd like to be part of it. As a partner, not a protector. You'd keep your shop, your house, your business. I'd find work here, maybe at one of the ranches outside town, and we'd build something together, if that's something you might want." Katherine looked at him, at this man who had appeared in her life less than a week ago, and somehow seen past all her defenses to the lonely woman beneath. "I might want that," she whispered. "But Reid, this is so fast. We barely know each other." "Then let's take time to know each other better," Reid said reasonably. I'll go finish this drive. You'll stay here and think about whether this is really what you want. And when I come back in a month, we'll see where we stand. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. It was the perfect thing to say, the exact right balance of hope and practicality. Katherine squeezed his hand. "When you come back," she said carefully, "I think I'd like to explore that possibility." Reid smiled, and Katherine felt that door in her chest swing open a little wider. The next 2 days passed too quickly. Reid spent every moment he could with Katherine, helping her in the shop, walking with her through town, sitting on her porch in the evenings. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of shared stories and small intimacies. He told her about his dreams of owning land someday, of raising horses maybe, of having a place that was truly his. She told him about her plans to expand her business, maybe take on an apprentice, maybe start selling her own designs instead of just doing custom work. On the last evening, they stood on her porch as the sun went down, and Reid pulled her gently into his arms. It was the first time he had really held her, and Katherine leaned into his warmth, breathing in the smell of soap and leather. "1 month," Reid murmured into her hair. "I'll be back in 1 month and we'll figure this out." 1 month, Katherine agreed. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When he finally pulled away, Katherine's eyes were wet. "You're crying," Reid said, concerned. "Good tears," Katherine assured him. "Hopeful tears." He kissed her forehead and left. Katherine stood on her porch long after he disappeared into the darkness, her fingers touching her lips, her heart full of equal parts joy and terror. She had let someone in. After 3 years of walls and independence, she had let someone past her defenses. And it was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The next morning, the trail crew left town and Katherine went back to work. Life continued, but everything felt different. She moved through her days with a sense of anticipation, counting down toward that month when Reid would return. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, taking on new commissions, experimenting with designs. For 2 weeks, everything was fine. She worked, she managed her accounts, she deflected questions from nosy neighbors about the cowboy she had been seen with. Walter Sutton glared at her whenever their paths crossed, but he kept his distance. Then things started going wrong. It started small. A shipment of fabric she had ordered failed to arrive. When she inquired, the freight company claimed they had never received the order, though Katherine had the receipt to prove otherwise. Then one of her best customers, a rancher's wife who ordered a new dress every season, sent a note canceling her standing commission. No explanation, just a terse cancellation. More customers followed, always with flimsy excuses or no excuses at all. Katherine's appointment book, usually filled weeks in advance, started showing gaps. She told herself it was temporary, just a coincidence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coordinated about it all. Her suspicions were confirmed when Martha Hayes came into the shop, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Katherine," Martha said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Walter Sutton has been going around to people, saying things. He's telling customers that you're unreliable, that you've been distracted by improper relationships, that you might be closing your shop soon. He's suggesting that people take their business elsewhere." Katherine felt cold. "That's slander. I could bring charges." "You could," Martha agreed, "but it would be your word against his, and he's been careful. He phrases everything as concern, as suggestions. And Katherine, I hate to say this, but he has influence. People listen to him." "Why are you telling me this?" Katherine asked. Martha met her eyes. "Because I think what you're doing is brave, and I'm tired of men like Walter deciding what women should and shouldn't do. But I wanted you to know what you're up against." After Martha left, Katherine sat in her shop and tried to think clearly. She could fight this. She could go to each customer personally, could defend herself, could try to counter Walter's poison. But it would take time and energy, and there was no guarantee it would work. The sad truth was that a man's word carried more weight than a woman's, especially when that woman had rejected him. She thought about Reid's question. "Don't you ever want to leave?" Maybe that was the answer. Maybe she should sell the shop, take what money she could get, and start over somewhere else. Somewhere Walter Sutton's bitterness couldn't reach her, but even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't. This was her town, her shop, her home. She had earned these things through hard work and determination, and she would not be driven out. She just wasn't sure how to fight back. The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, Katherine was locking up her shop when Reverend Morris appeared. He was a thin, scholarly man in his 60s, and Katherine braced herself for a lecture about propriety or womanly duties. Instead, the Reverend smiled kindly at her. "Mrs. Brennan, I wonder if I might have a word." "Of course, Reverend." "I've been hearing disturbing rumors," he said without preamble. "Rumors that suggest certain parties are conducting a campaign to damage your business and your reputation. I want you to know that I find this deeply troubling, and I intend to address it in my sermon this Sunday." Katherine stared at him. "Reverend, I don't want to cause trouble." "You haven't caused trouble, my dear. You've simply lived your life with integrity and independence, and certain small-minded individuals can't tolerate that." He patted her hand. "Have faith. The truth has a way of prevailing." Sunday's sermon was something Katherine would remember for the rest of her life. Reverend Morris spoke about bearing false witness, about the sin of gossip, about the biblical women who had shown strength and independence. He never named names, but everyone in the congregation knew exactly who and what he was talking about. Katherine sat in her usual pew and felt tears prickling her eyes as the Reverend defended her without ever saying her name. After the service, people approached her. Some were apologetic, some were supportive, a few were defiant. But the message was clear. The tide was turning. Walter had overplayed his hand, and the community was pushing back. The following week, several of Katherine's former customers returned, shamefaced and full of excuses. She took their orders with grace and dignity, never mentioning the cancellations. Her appointment book started filling up again. The crisis wasn't over, but it was manageable, and through it all, Katherine counted the days until Reid would return. The month passed slowly, and then all at once. Katherine threw herself into work, rebuilt her business, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Reid might change his mind. He might decide that settling down wasn't for him after all. He might return and realize that their connection had been temporary, a product of novelty and proximity rather than anything real. But on a warm afternoon in late August, Katherine looked up from her sewing machine to see a familiar figure in her doorway, dusty and tired and smiling. "I'm back," Reid said simply. Katherine stood so fast she knocked over her chair. She didn't care. She crossed the shop in 3 strides and threw herself into his arms, feeling them close around her, solid and real. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would," Reid said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I was afraid," Katherine admitted. "Afraid you'd change your mind, afraid this wasn't real." Reid pulled back enough to look at her face. "It's real," he said firmly. "I spent the whole month thinking about you, about this, about what we could build together. And Katherine, I'm more sure now than I was when I left. If you'll have me, I want to stay. I want to be part of your life." "Yes," Katherine said, the word coming easily. "Yes, I want that too." He kissed her then, right there in the shop with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and anyone who walked by able to see. Katherine didn't care. Let them see. Let them talk. This was her choice, her life, her love. When they finally broke apart, Reid was grinning. So what happens now? Now, Katherine said, suddenly nervous, we figure out the practical details. You need to find work. We need to decide how to manage this without causing more scandal. We need to discuss what we both want from this relationship. Always so practical, Reid said fondly. All right. I've already talked to John Patterson, Martha's husband. He manages the big ranch south of town and he's willing to hire me on. The pay's decent and it's steady work. As for scandal, well, I thought we could do things properly. Court for a few months, let people get used to seeing us together, then get married if that's what we both want. Katherine felt her chest tighten. Marriage, eventually, Reid said carefully, if that's something you're interested in. I know you value your independence, Katherine, and I respect that. But I want to be clear about my intentions. I'm not here for a temporary arrangement. I'm here because I'm falling in love with you, and I want to build a life with you. I'm falling in love with you too, Katherine said, the words terrifying and liberating all at once. But Reid, if we marry, I keep my shop, I keep my business, I keep my own money, I won't give that up. I wouldn't ask you to, Reid said. What's yours is yours, what I earn is mine. And what we build together is ours. Does that work for you? It was so simple, so straightforward that Katherine almost couldn't believe it, but Reid's expression was sincere. He meant it. That works for me, she said softly. Reid moved into the boarding house and started work at the Patterson ranch the next week. True to his word, he courted Katherine properly. He took her to dinners, to church socials, to walks along the creek outside town. He was respectful, patient, and utterly devoted. The town watched and whispered, but gradually, the whispers turned approving. Walter Sutton tried one more time to cause trouble, suggesting loudly in the saloon that Reid was just after Katherine's money and property. Reid heard about it and walked into the saloon the next evening, quiet and calm. "Mr. Sutton," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "I understand you have concerns about my intentions toward Mrs. Brennan. Let me make something clear. I respect Katherine Brennan more than any woman I've ever met. I respect her strength, her intelligence, and her independence. When we marry, and we will marry, it will be because we choose each other as equals. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to discuss it with me outside." Walter, faced with a younger, fitter man who clearly meant business, backed down. He muttered something about not meaning any offense and left shortly after. The story spread through town by morning, and Reid became something of a hero to the women and the more progressive men. Katherine heard about it from 3 different sources and confronted Reid that evening. "You didn't have to do that," she said, torn between exasperation and warmth. "Yes, I did," Reid said calmly. "He needed to understand that you're not alone and that there are consequences for attacking you. I won't let anyone hurt you, Katherine, not if I can help it." "I can defend myself," Katherine said, but her voice was softer now. "I know you can," Reid said. "But you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore. That's what partnership means, doesn't it? We stand together." Katherine kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into it. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "You're right. We stand together." The months that followed were the happiest Katherine could remember. She worked in her shop during the day, and in the evenings, Reid would come by after finishing at the ranch. They would have dinner together, walk through town, sit on her porch and plan their future. On Sundays, they attended church together, and afterward they would often have lunch with friends. The community gradually accepted their relationship, and eventually it became normal. Reid and Katherine, the cowboy and the seamstress, building something solid and real. Reid proved to be as good as his word in every way. He never tried to control Katherine's business, never suggested she should scale back or change how she operated. Instead, he asked questions about her work, admired her skills, and occasionally helped with heavy lifting or errands. He made it clear to everyone who would listen that he was proud of her independence, that it was one of the things he loved most about her. For Katherine, learning to share her life with someone again was an adjustment. She had grown used to making all her own decisions, to answering to no one. But Reid made it easy. He respected her opinions, consulted her on decisions, and never assumed he had the right to override her choices. They disagreed sometimes, about small things and occasionally larger ones, but they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and find middle ground. In December, Reid asked her to marry him properly, on one knee in her parlor with a simple gold band he had saved for. "Katherine Brennan," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, "you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. I love your determination, your skill, your generous heart. I love how you fight for what's yours, how you never back down from a challenge. I love your laugh, your careful hands, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you, supporting you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Katherine was crying, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Reid, I'll marry you." They were married in February of 1879, in the little church in Stillwater with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a gown she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that Reid had ridden out to find that morning. Reid wore the suit Katherine had made for him, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. Reverend Morris performed the ceremony, and his blessing was heartfelt. We are here today to witness the union of two people who have chosen each other with open eyes and honest hearts. Katherine and Reid come to this marriage as equals, each bringing their own strengths, their own dreams. May they build a life together that honors both their individuality and their partnership. When Reid kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the boarding house, and everyone danced and ate and celebrated late into the night. Walter Sutton did not attend, but Katherine barely noticed his absence. She was too busy dancing with her husband, laughing with friends, feeling the weight of 3 lonely years finally lifting from her shoulders. Reid moved into Katherine's house, and they settled into married life with surprising ease. Katherine kept her shop and her business. Reid kept working at the Patterson Ranch and saving money toward buying land of their own someday. In the evenings, they worked together on the house, expanding the garden, fixing up the porch, making the space truly theirs. The town accepted the marriage, and Katherine found that her business actually improved. Married to a hardworking, respectable man who clearly adored her, she was no longer quite so threatening. It was ironic and a little infuriating, but Katherine decided to take the practical view. If marriage made people more comfortable doing business with her, so be it. What mattered was that she hadn't given up anything essential. She still owned her shop, still made her own decisions, still had her independence. She had simply added partnership to it. Reid proved to be an excellent partner in every sense. He never expected Katherine to give up her work to keep house for him. Instead, they split the domestic tasks fairly, and when Katherine was busy with a big commission, Reid took on more without complaint. He encouraged her ambitions, celebrated her successes, and commiserated over her setbacks. A year into their marriage, Reid came home one evening with news. "John Patterson is retiring," he said, "and he's offered me the position of ranch manager. It's a big step up in pay, and it comes with a house on the ranch property." Katherine looked up from her sewing. "That's wonderful, Reid." "You should take it." "That's the thing," Reid said slowly. "The house is 5 miles outside town. If I take this job, we'd need to move, and I know you need to be close to your shop. Katherine set down her work and thought carefully. Could I make it work, driving in each day? It would be hard, Reid admitted, especially in winter. But Katherine, I don't want you to give up your business, not for anything. If this doesn't work for you, I'll turn it down. Katherine stood and crossed to him, taking his hands. How much does the pay increase mean to us? In terms of our long-term plans, it would let us buy land within 2 years instead of 5. It would give us real financial security. And you want this job? I do, Reid said, but not at the cost of your work. Katherine thought about it, weighing options. What if, she said slowly, we keep this house in town? I could stay here during the week when I have heavy work, and you could come into town on your days off. And I could come to the ranch house on weekends. It's not traditional, but it might work. Reid's face lit up. You'd be willing to try that? We'd be building toward something together, Katherine said. Toward land of our own, toward a future. And we'd both keep doing the work we love. It's a compromise, but I think it's a fair one. They tried the arrangement, and to Katherine's surprise, it worked well. The separation during the week was hard, but it made their time together on weekends sweeter. Katherine discovered that she liked having time to herself, liked being able to work late without feeling guilty, liked maintaining her independence even within marriage. And Reid threw himself into his new position, earning the respect of the ranch hands and increasing the ranch's productivity. They wrote letters to each other during the week, long, rambling letters full of daily details and professions of love. On Saturday mornings, Katherine would close her shop and drive out to the ranch in the small buggy Reid had bought for her. They would spend the weekend together, and on Sunday evenings, Reid would drive her back to town. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. 2 years into their marriage, Reid came to Katherine with a proposition. There's a piece of land for sale, he said. 200 acres, good water, some timber. It's between here and the ranch, about 3 miles from town. I think we could afford it. Katherine looked at the figures he had drawn up, at the careful budget he had created. This would use all our savings. It would, Reid agreed. But it's good land, Katherine. We could build a house, start small with a few horses, build it into something substantial. You could still keep your shop in town. The distance is manageable. Katherine studied her husband's face, saw the hope and excitement there. This was his dream, had been his dream since before they met. Let's do it, she said. Let's buy the land. They purchased the property in the spring of 1881, and Reid spent every spare moment working on it. He cleared a building site, marked out where a house would go, started planning for corrals and a barn. Katherine came out on weekends to help, and slowly, their vision started taking shape. It took 2 years to build the house, Reid and some hired hands working mostly on weekends and during the ranch's slower seasons. It was a simple structure, wood frame with a wide porch, but it was solid and well built. Katherine made curtains for the windows and cushions for the chairs. They moved furniture out from town bit by bit. And in the fall of 1883, 5 years after they had first met, Reid and Katherine Caldwell finally moved into their own house on their own land. Katherine kept her shop in town, now traveling in 3 days a week and working from home the rest of the time. Reid had left the Patterson Ranch by this point and was focusing on building their horse business. It was hard work, long hours and constant challenges, but they were doing it together. The first winter in their new house was difficult. Snow made the trip to town treacherous, and Katherine found herself isolated in a way she hadn't been before. She missed the convenience of town, missed being close to her shop. But Reid was there, steady and patient, and they made it through together. Spring came, and with it, new beginnings. Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Reid on a sunny April morning, standing in their kitchen with the windows open and the smell of wildflowers drifting in. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. Reid's face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. "A baby." "Katherine, are you sure?" "I'm sure." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We're having a baby. We're going to be parents." The pregnancy was difficult. Katherine had never been particularly interested in having children, had assumed after Thomas died that motherhood wasn't in her future. Now, at 29, she found herself dealing with morning sickness, fatigue, and a body that no longer quite felt like her own. She struggled with the loss of control, with the vulnerability of it all. Reid was endlessly patient. He took over more of the physical work, encouraged her to rest, never complained when she was irritable or scared. "We're in this together," he kept saying. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Their son was born in December of 1883, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him Thomas after Katherine's first husband, and Reid held his tiny son with tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Reid whispered. "Katherine, he's absolutely perfect." Motherhood transformed Katherine in ways she hadn't expected. She discovered a fierce protectiveness, a capacity for love that was almost frightening in its intensity. But she also discovered that she could be a mother without giving up everything else. She went back to her sewing within a month, setting up a cradle in her shop, working while Thomas slept. It was exhausting, but it was doable. Reid was a devoted father. He walked the floor with Thomas when he cried, changed diapers without complaint, and sang lullabies in his rough cowboy voice. They navigated parenthood together, making mistakes and learning as they went. The horse business grew slowly but steadily. Reid had an eye for good stock and a patient hand with training. Word spread that Caldwell horses were reliable, well-trained, and fairly priced. Money was still tight, but they were making it work. Katherine's business continued to thrive. She had trained a young woman named Sarah to help in the shop, which gave her more flexibility. She took on fewer commissions but charged higher prices for her expertise. She was known now as one of the best seamstresses in the territory, and people came from miles around for her work. 2 years after Thomas was born, Katherine had a daughter. They named her Elizabeth, and she was a tiny, delicate baby with Katherine's brown hair and a disposition that was sunny from the start. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, and Reid joked that they were building their own crew. Life settled into a rhythm. The work was constant, the challenges never ending, but there was joy in it. Katherine would stand on their porch in the evenings, watching Reid work with a young horse in the corral, watching Thomas try to help, watching Elizabeth toddle around the yard, and feel a contentment she had never imagined possible. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been 7 years ago, rigid with independence, determined to need no one. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She had learned that strength didn't mean doing everything alone. It meant choosing your partnerships wisely, building a life with someone who respected your autonomy while offering support. It meant being vulnerable enough to love and be loved in return. Walter Sutton died in 1886, falling off his horse while drunk. Katherine felt nothing when she heard the news, neither satisfaction nor sadness. He had become irrelevant to her life, a minor antagonist in a story that had moved far beyond him. The years passed, marked by the usual joys and sorrows. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick children and financial scares. There were also birthdays and holidays, new horses born, good harvests from the expanding garden. Katherine closed her shop in town eventually, finding it easier to work from home. She took commissions by mail, and people still sought her out for special projects. In 1890, when Katherine was 36 and Reid was 37, they added 2 more children to their family, twins this time, boys they named James and Robert. Their house felt perpetually chaotic after that, full of noise and activity and love. Reid's hair was starting to gray at the temples, and Katherine found she liked it. It made him look distinguished, she teased. He pointed out that she had a few silver threads herself now, and she shrugged. She had earned every one of them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Reid gave Katherine a gift. It was a sign, beautifully carved, that read Caldwell Ranch. "I thought we might hang it at the entrance to the property," he said. "Make it official." Katherine traced the letters with her fingers. "Caldwell Ranch," she repeated. "I like it, though it should really say Brennan Caldwell Ranch." "Katherine," Reid said gently, "you've kept your business name all these years, but this is our ranch, our family. I'd be honored if you'd share my name for this, at least." Katherine considered, then nodded. "Caldwell Ranch it is, for the family we've built together." They hung the sign that afternoon, all 6 of them working together. Thomas, now 10, helped his father secure the posts. Elizabeth, 8, gave directions. The 4-year-old twins mostly got in the way, but they tried. Katherine stood back and watched her family, this loud, chaotic, wonderful family that she and Reid had created, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. That evening, after the children were in bed, Reid and Katherine sat on their porch watching the stars come out. "Do you ever regret it?" Reid asked quietly. "The life you had before, the independence." Katherine thought about it carefully. "I don't regret my independence," she said finally. "It made me who I am. But I don't miss being alone. I'm still independent, Reid. I still make my own choices, still have my work. I've just added you and the children to it. That's not loss. That's growth." "Your strength makes you more beautiful," Reid said, echoing the words he had spoken to her 12 years ago. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Watching you build a business, raise our children, manage everything with such grace and determination. You amaze me every single day." Katherine leaned against his shoulder. "We've built a good life," she said softly. "It's not the life I imagined back when I was 24 and determined to need no one. It's better." "Better," Reid agreed. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Katherine Caldwell." "I love you too," Katherine said. "Now and always." They sat together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other deeply, who had weathered storms together and come out stronger. The ranch stretched out around them, the product of years of hard work and shared dreams. Inside the house, their children slept safely. And Katherine thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the journey that had brought her here. She had been rejected for her independence, called unnatural for wanting to stand on her own. But she had found a man who saw that independence as strength, who loved her not in spite of it but because of it. Together, they had built something that honored both her need for autonomy and his desire for partnership. It hadn't been easy. There had been compromises and challenges, moments of doubt and fear. But there had also been love, deep and enduring, the kind of love that made everything else possible. As the stars wheeled overhead and the Oklahoma night wrapped around them, Katherine felt at peace. This was her life, built by her own hands with the partner she had chosen. This was her happy ending, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. The children grew, as children do. Thomas developed his father's way with horses and his mother's careful attention to detail. By the time he was 15, he could break and train a young horse better than most men twice his age. Elizabeth inherited Katherine's skill with needle and thread, along with a keen business sense that promised interesting things for her future. The twins were wild and reckless, always getting into trouble but good-hearted and loyal. Katherine and Reid grew older together, their love deepening with the years. They had their disagreements, times when Reid's stubbornness clashed with Katherine's determination, times when the stress of running a ranch and raising children strained their patience. But they had learned early to talk things through, to never go to bed angry, to remember why they had chosen each other. In 1895, 17 years after they first met, the Caldwell Ranch was thriving. They had expanded to 300 acres, ran a successful horse breeding operation, and had a reputation that extended throughout the territory. Katherine still took sewing commissions, though more selectively now, focusing on complex projects that challenged her skills. She had trained Elizabeth in the craft, and together they produced work that was sought after across the region. Thomas, at 19, was talking about finding his own land, starting his own operation. Reid encouraged him, offered to help however he could. Katherine watched her eldest son growing into manhood and felt the bittersweet pride of a mother watching a child become independent. Elizabeth, at 17, had 3 young men courting her seriously. She rejected them all with Katherine's same quiet determination, saying she wasn't ready to settle down yet. Katherine supported her completely, remembering her own journey. The twins, at 13, were still more interested in mischief than anything else, but even they were starting to think about the future, about what they wanted to do with their lives. One evening in late summer, Katherine and Reid took a rare evening alone, riding out to the far edge of their property where a creek ran through a stand of cottonwood trees. They dismounted and sat by the water, listening to it burble over rocks. "We've done all right," Reid said quietly. "Haven't we?" Katherine took his hand. His fingers were rough from years of ranch work, and there were scars from rope burns and horse bites. She loved those hands, loved what they represented. "We've done more than all right," she said. "We've built something real, something that will outlast us." "The children," Reid said. "They'll carry on. Thomas with his horses, Elizabeth with her sewing and whatever else she decides to pursue. Even the twins will figure out their paths eventually." "And we did it together," Katherine said. "Partners, just like you promised." Reid turned to look at her. The evening light caught in his graying hair, highlighted the lines around his eyes. He was 45 now, and Katherine was 44, and they were no longer the young people who had met in a stable doorway 17 years ago. But when he smiled at her, Katherine felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first evening. "I would do it all again," Reid said. "Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of doubt, all of it to end up here with you." "So would I," Katherine said simply. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking about their children, about the ranch, about plans for the future. They talked about everything and nothing the way they had since the beginning. And when they finally rode back to the house, they rode side by side, as they had always done. Years continued to pass. Thomas did buy his own land, just across the creek from the main ranch, and started his own breeding operation. He married a quiet, practical woman named Helen, and they gave Katherine and Reid their first grandchildren. Elizabeth eventually accepted a proposal from a young lawyer from Guthrie, a man who respected her intelligence and encouraged her ambitions. She continued her sewing even after marriage, building her own business. The twins went different paths, one staying on the ranch, one heading to California to seek his fortune. Katherine and Reid became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They slowed down as the years took their toll, but they never stopped working, never stopped building. Reid still trained horses well into his 60s, though he left the more dangerous work to younger men. Katherine still sewed, her fingers still nimble even when arthritis made them ache. In 1908, 30 years after they met, Katherine and Reid celebrated their 29th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. Katherine, now 54, looked around at the family she and Reid had created and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after everyone had left, Reid found Katherine on the porch, sitting in the rocking chair he had built for her 10th anniversary. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into his own chair beside her. "I'm thinking about the day we met," Katherine said. "About how you walked into my shop looking for shirts, and how I never could have imagined where it would lead." "I knew," Reid said. "I took one look at you and knew you were someone special, someone worth staying for." "You told me my strength made me more beautiful," Katherine reminded him. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, I think, because you saw something in me that so many others tried to make me ashamed of." "How could I not?" Reid reached over and took her hand. "Katherine, you were the most alive person I had ever met. Independent, capable, determined. You still are. That strength, that fire, it's what makes you you, and I've been honored to stand beside you all these years." Katherine squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained even as they both aged. "We've had a good life," she said softly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was young and determined to need no one." "The best life," Reid agreed. "And it's not over yet. We have more years ahead of us, more grandchildren to spoil, more memories to make." They rocked together in the gathering darkness, two people who had chosen each other across all the years and challenges. The ranch stretched out around them, testament to their shared work and dreams. Inside the house, photographs lined the walls, documenting 3 decades of love and family. And on the porch, Reid and Katherine Caldwell sat hand in hand, grateful for the journey that had brought them here and eager for whatever years remained. Katherine thought about the woman she had been at 24, fierce and alone, determined to prove she needed no one. She thought about the risk she had taken, letting Reid past her defenses, allowing herself to love again. It had been terrifying and wonderful, and it had led to this: a full life, a large family, a partnership that had endured and deepened over 3 decades. She had been rejected for her independence, told that her strength made her unnatural and unwomanly. But Reid had seen her clearly from the beginning. He had loved her strength, had celebrated it, had built a life with her that honored both her autonomy and their partnership. He had been right all those years ago. Her strength had made her more beautiful because it had made her fully herself. And being fully herself had allowed her to love fully, to build fully, to live fully. As the stars appeared one by one in the Oklahoma sky, Katherine leaned her head on Reid's shoulder and smiled. This was her happy ending, earned through courage and work and love. This was the life she had chosen, with the partner who had seen her truly and loved her completely. And it was beautiful.